The gunshot split the air like thunder. Bang. The crystal chandelier above the grand ballroom trembled violently, fragments of dust raining down like ash from a broken sky. Panic erupted instantly. Children shrieked, their cries piercing through the chaos, as men in expensive tuxedos threw themselves to the ground, their wealth now reduced to nothing more than fragile fabric shielding them from death. Women clutched their pearls and gasped for air as the cold reality of danger pressed in from all sides. And there, in the very center of it all, the billionaire Richard Lawson stood frozen, his polished shoes planted on marble that suddenly felt like quicksand beneath him. The barrel of a pistol gleamed inches from his forehead, the masked man behind it growling through clenched teeth. "Shut up, rich boy. One more word and you're dead." His wife sobbed uncontrollably, clutching her 3 children as though her embrace alone might keep them alive. But amidst the screaming, the begging, and the rattling of fear, there was one presence that refused to bend, one woman who did not crumble, who did not beg, who did not shake like the others, the maid, Naomi Carter. Quiet, overlooked, and yet in that single, breathless moment, she stepped forward into the line of fire. Her hands were steady, her gaze locked on the men who had taken control of the room, calm, defiant. Her silence was louder than any scream, her presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. While the wealthy billionaire trembled, his voice stolen by fear, she stood taller, unflinching before the gun that hovered only inches from her life. And as every set of eyes turned toward her, Richard Lawson realized something that struck him harder than the gun pressed to his head. This woman was not who he thought she was, and what she did next would leave the world in utter disbelief. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Who was Naomi Carter? The quiet maid who had served Richard Lawson's household for years, folding linens, polishing the silver, and setting tables without ever raising her voice. In that hall of terror, when the chandeliers shook and the screams grew louder, it was Naomi who stepped forward unflinching, her gaze steady even as a weapon was thrust against her forehead. Her reaction was not what anyone expected. Not Richard, not his wife Elena, and certainly not the guests who had seen her only as a shadow in their wealthy world. Why didn't she collapse in fear like the rest? Why didn't her body betray her with trembling hands or tears? That night, Naomi revealed a side of herself no one had seen before. And the question that haunted everyone afterward was simple but chilling. Who was this woman really? And what had life done to her that prepared her for this moment? Her defiance created more questions than answers. What allowed a maid, someone society overlooked as invisible, to face down masked robbers when millionaires cowered and begged? What gave her the confidence to stand between armed men and crying children without a shred of hesitation? And how, in the chaos of that night, did she turn what should have been a massacre into a story that spread across the world like wildfire? This was not just about bravery, it was about identity, about secrets, and about the hidden strength of a woman no one truly knew. Naomi Carter was no ordinary maid, and soon, the truth about her past and the choices she made that night would shake Richard Lawson, his family, and everyone who heard the story to their very core. Richard Lawson was a name that carried weight in New York, a towering figure in real estate. His empire stretched from Manhattan's glittering skyline to the quiet suburbs where families dreamed of stability. His fortune had been built on ambition, risk, and ruthless deals that made him both admired and envied. Behind the walls of his marble mansion, Richard surrounded himself with symbols of security: armored vehicles, private guards, surveillance cameras watching every corner of his estate. Yet for all his wealth and paranoia about safety, Richard remained a man haunted by the thought of losing what he valued most: his family. His wife Elena embodied the role of elegance, always graceful at galas, the mother who never let her children see her worry. Together, they were a picture of privilege, 3 young lives growing in comfort and excess, sheltered by riches Richard believed would protect them from the dangers of the world. Naomi Carter, however, lived a life in stark contrast. To the Lawson family, she was the maid who appeared each morning with quiet efficiency, blending into the background as though she were part of the walls she polished. She knew every inch of the house, every squeak of the floorboards, every stain the children tried to hide before their mother noticed. Yet she never sought attention, never raised her voice, never stepped outside the boundaries of her role. To Elena, Naomi was dependable. To the children, she was familiar, like the furniture, always present yet unnoticed. And to Richard, she was just another employee, a worker in the machine that made his world seamless. What no one realized was that Naomi carried with her a past filled with storms, experiences she never spoke of, choices that had shaped her into a woman who could stand steady when others fell apart. There were moments subtle and fleeting that hinted at something deeper within Naomi. When a glass shattered near the kitchen, she never flinched, moving instead with calm precision to clean the shards, while others jumped at the sound. When one of the children fell and scraped a knee, her hands moved not only with tenderness but with a practiced steadiness, as though she had mended far worse injuries before. Even Richard noticed once, when a storm raged outside and thunder shook the windows, Naomi did not even turn her head. She continued folding linen with the same measured rhythm, her face betraying no fear. To those who looked closer, her silence was not emptiness. It was control. It was discipline. It was the kind of quiet that only came from someone who had already faced life's most violent storms and walked away stronger. And so Naomi Carter remained, day after day, in the shadows of a household consumed by wealth and appearances. She carried herself with humility, never demanding recognition, never revealing more than she intended. But inside her rested a reservoir of resilience that no one in the Lawson family could see. Richard Lawson believed money could buy safety, that cameras and guards would shield his loved ones from harm. He had no idea that true protection was already standing inside his home, disguised in the simple uniform of a maid. For when the night of terror finally arrived and masked men stormed into the ballroom, it was not his fortune, not his guards, not his influence that saved him. It was Naomi, the woman he had overlooked, whose unshakable calm would become the thin line between life and death. The Lawson estate glittered that night. Chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light, violins filled the air, and some of the most powerful figures in New York society gathered beneath Richard Lawson's roof. It was a charity gala designed to impress, a showcase of wealth wrapped in the language of generosity. Elena Lawson floated gracefully through the room, greeting guests with practiced charm, while Richard soaked in their admiration. He was proud of this image, the real estate mogul turned philanthropist. Yet beneath the laughter and clinking of glasses, Richard's mind never rested. Even here, surrounded by the elite, he had armed guards stationed at the gates, but all the cameras, all the precautions, could not stop what happened next. In an instant, the music stopped. A gunshot cracked like lightning, echoing off the marble walls. The doors burst open, and masked men surged inside, carrying weapons that cut through the celebration like knives. Panic spread like fire. Guests screamed and stumbled, the elegance of gowns and tuxedos collapsing into chaos as armed figures shouted commands. "On the floor!" one robber barked, his voice sharp, metallic under the mask. Another fired into the ceiling, shards of crystal raining down from a chandelier. The guards Richard trusted so dearly were disarmed in seconds, their weapons kicked across the floor. Men of wealth, men accustomed to control, dropped to their knees, hands raised in trembling surrender. Women clutched their pearls, their bracelets ripped from their wrists as thieves swept through the room. Jewelry boxes were emptied, Rolexes stripped from wrists, wallets torn from designer jackets. Every ounce of luxury, every glittering symbol of privilege, was reduced to spoils under the barrel of a gun. And at the center of it all, Richard Lawson himself, the man who had conquered the skyline, broke down in fear. Richard's voice cracked as he begged, "Please, please, take whatever you want. Just don't hurt my family." His once commanding presence dissolved into desperation, his expensive suit soaked with sweat as he dropped to his knees in front of men who showed no mercy. Elena's sobs echoed as she pulled their children close, shielding their eyes, her tears streaking down her face. The mogul who had believed money could buy security now realized that in this moment, his fortune meant nothing. He was as powerless as every guest sprawled across the marble floor. The thieves circled him like vultures, one pressing a gun to his temple. "You think you're untouchable, rich man?" the voice growled. "You bleed like the rest of them." Richard's lips trembled. For the first time in years, the man who commanded towers felt smaller than dust. The empire he built couldn't shield him. And that night, he knew it. But amidst the chaos, one figure refused to bend. Naomi Carter did not kneel. While guests wept and men begged for their lives, she stood firm, her posture steady, her gaze fixed on the armed men as if their weapons meant nothing. A robber turned his gun on her, the cold steel inches from her face. "Get down," he snarled. The room seemed to freeze, all eyes shifting to the quiet maid no one had noticed until this very moment. Naomi's voice broke the silence, calm and unwavering. "Point your gun lower. You scare them more than you scare me." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the children clutching their mother's arms lifted their heads. It was the kind of defiance no one could comprehend, the kind that shifted the air itself. And in that instant, Naomi Carter transformed. She was no longer invisible. She was the force that would change everything. The ballroom held its breath. Naomi Carter stood unmoved, the barrel of a gun pressed to her forehead. Yet her voice was steady, almost unsettling in its calmness. "You're shaking," she said, her eyes locked on the robber's mask. "Your hands, they're not steady." The man hesitated, his grip faltering as her words cut through the chaos. Guests looked up from the floor, disbelief flickering across their tear-stained faces. Naomi was not pleading for mercy, she was dismantling the man holding her life in his hands. She saw fear in him, and she named it. That truth was heavier than any weapon. The leader barked orders, his voice cracking, exposing the fracture beneath his rage. Each second Naomi spoke bought time, steadying the room, shifting the balance. She wasn't just surviving, she was taking control, and everyone, Richard Lawson included, realized the power in her composure. The leader's mask of confidence cracked. He shouted louder, waving his gun wildly, but his words stumbled. Naomi didn't flinch. She took a single step closer. "You don't want this," she said firmly. "You've lost control already." The room gasped as the robber faltered, his hands betraying him. Then, in a blur so fast the eye could barely follow, Naomi moved. With military precision, she twisted his wrist, the gun snapping from his hand in one smooth motion. Gasps turned to stunned silence as the weapon clattered to the marble floor. Before the other robbers could react, Naomi struck again. A swift kick disarmed the second man, her movements sharp, efficient, practiced. Within moments, two of the armed intruders were subdued, their own weapons pointed against them. Guests rose halfway in shock, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Naomi Carter, the maid no one had seen, had become their shield. Panic erupted among the remaining robbers. The men who had stormed into the Lawson estate with dominance now stumbled back in fear. The police sirens outside grew louder, drawing closer. Some tried to flee, but Naomi had already bought the time everyone needed. With the leader pinned to the ground and another robber immobilized, the chaos dissolved into control. The mansion gates burst open as armed officers poured into the ballroom. Within minutes, the robbers were caught, their weapons confiscated, their power stripped away. Guests collapsed in relief, sobbing, holding each other tightly as the danger faded. Richard Lawson gathered Elena and the children, his arms trembling as he held them. And through it all, Naomi stood upright, her breathing steady, her expression unreadable. The police secured the scene, but everyone knew the truth. It was Naomi, not the officers, who had saved them from certain tragedy. By morning, the story spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed across the nation. The maid who stopped a heist. Television anchors replayed shaky footage from cell phones smuggled out during the ordeal. Clips of Naomi's fearless stance against armed men circulated online, turning her into an instant phenomenon. Talk shows debated her actions, newspapers demanded to know her story, and strangers hailed her as a hero. Guests from that night described her as fearless and superhuman and the only reason we're alive. Yet as the media frenzy grew, one man remained unsettled. Richard Lawson. In the quiet aftermath, away from flashing cameras and reporters' questions, he was haunted by a single thought. This woman had lived in his home, moved silently through his halls and cared for his family. Yet he had never truly known her. And now, after seeing her dismantle armed criminals with ease, he whispered the question that refused to leave him. Who is Naomi Carter? The world saw Naomi Carter as a maid who transformed into a hero, but Richard Lawson could not settle for headlines. He needed answers. Who was this woman who had moved like a soldier, thought like a tactician, and stared danger in the face as if she had rehearsed it 100 times before? So he began to ask questions quietly, pulling at threads that others overlooked. And slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. Naomi Carter was not an ordinary domestic worker. She was a veteran. Years earlier, before polishing silver and setting tables at the Lawson estate, Naomi had worn the uniform of the United States Army. Records revealed that she had served overseas, in combat zones most Americans only heard about on the evening news. She had been trained in counter-terror operations, in survival, in reading fear before it could become action. Naomi Carter had been forged in war. Her past was not simply a career. It was sacrifice. Naomi's husband, too, had served. They had met in uniform, trained together, deployed together. But while she returned, he did not. He was killed in Iraq, one of countless soldiers whose names never made the headlines. His loss broke something inside her, and with it her will to remain in the military. Naomi left her service behind, not in disgrace, but in grief. To escape the noise of battle, she chose silence. To flee from violence, she embraced routine. The life of a maid, anonymous and unseen, was her attempt to start over. In the rhythm of dusting furniture and ironing linens, she found a strange kind of peace, or at least, the closest thing to it. No one at the Lawson estate knew this story. To them, she was invisible, but her silence hid a history written in sacrifice and pain. And yet, tragedy has a way of leaving its mark, a quiet shadow that lingers even in ordinary life. Naomi never spoke of her husband's death, never explained the medals folded away in a box she kept hidden. But on that night, when masked robbers stormed into the Lawson gala, the instincts she tried to bury came flooding back. She moved not as a servant, but as a soldier. Every step, every decision, every measured word carried the weight of training sharpened in deserts and streets far from New York. When Richard Lawson confronted her afterward, his voice trembling, Naomi did not boast of her bravery. Instead, her words were simple, almost haunting. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I didn't let fear win." It was the kind of confession that revealed both humanity and strength, a reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to rise above it. For Richard, the revelation changed everything. Naomi Carter, the quiet presence in his home, had once been a protector of an entire nation. The thought unsettled him. Why had he never noticed the discipline in her stride, the composure in her silence, the steel hidden beneath her gentleness? And more haunting still, what did it mean that a woman who had given so much to her country now lived unnoticed, cleaning the floors of a billionaire's mansion? The twist in her story was not just her identity, it was the uncomfortable truth it revealed about privilege, sacrifice, and the unseen lives of those who walk beside us every day. Naomi Carter was not who anyone thought she was, and her decision to step forward that night was not chance. It was destiny, one she could no longer hide. When the last of the masked robbers was dragged away in handcuffs, the Lawson estate was unrecognizable. Shattered glass glittered on the marble floors, Silk gowns were torn, tuxedos stained with fear. Guests clung to one another, whispering prayers of thanks that they had survived. Yet in the middle of that devastation stood Naomi Carter, calm as stone, her hands steady even as the police took the weapon from her grip. The world had already begun to call her a hero, the maid who stopped a heist. But for Richard Lawson, the moment was far more personal. Billionaire, real estate mogul, a man who measured life in assets and numbers, he realized that night that all his wealth had meant nothing. His fortune couldn't shield his wife. His status couldn't protect his children. What had saved them was Naomi, the woman he had once thought of as background, invisible, unimportant. Later, when the chaos had subsided and the guests departed, Richard approached Naomi in the quiet of his study. His voice trembled, stripped of arrogance. "Naomi," he whispered, "you saved us. You saved Elena. You saved my children. I don't know how to thank you." For a moment, her gaze softened. She shook her head slowly, her words deliberate, heavy with meaning. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "courage doesn't come from money. It comes from refusing to let fear win." The truth of it struck him harder than any threat that night. For the first time in his life, Richard Lawson understood that power did not live in gold watches or skyscrapers bearing his name. It lived in the quiet strength of a woman who refused to bow, even with a gun to her head. That revelation shook him to the core because it forced him to question everything he thought he knew about strength. The Lawson children clung to Naomi in the days that followed. They saw her not as the woman who served their meals, but as a shield, their protector. Elena Lawson, still shaken by the memory of guns pointed at her children, found herself looking at Naomi with a new kind of respect, one born of gratitude but also humility. Around their dinner table, the air felt different. Naomi was no longer invisible, no longer just the help. She was family, bound not by blood or wealth but by courage. Even the youngest child whispered one night before bed, "Naomi, you weren't scared." Naomi smiled gently, brushing the hair from the child's forehead. "I was scared," she admitted softly, "but I didn't let it control me. That's what matters." Those words, spoken with such quiet certainty, carried a weight that no textbook, no fortune, no sermon could ever teach. And so the story of Naomi Carter became more than a headline. It became a reminder that sometimes the most overlooked person in the room holds the greatest power, that bravery doesn't wear a suit or a diamond necklace. It doesn't stand on a stage or speak into microphones. True courage is found in silence, in stillness, in the refusal to let fear dictate the outcome. Richard Lawson's billions couldn't buy that. No vault of gold, no guarded mansion, no army of bodyguards could match the resolve of one woman who simply chose to stand her ground. And in that truth lay the final twist. The billionaire who thought he had everything discovered that the most valuable thing in his home was not bought, not owned, not measured in dollars. It was Naomi Carter, a maid, a soldier, a protector whose courage redefined what it truly meant to be powerful. Naomi Carter. The maid who silenced guns with courage. The woman who stood taller than fear when everyone else fell to the ground. She reminded Richard Lawson, Elena, their children, and the entire world of something we so often forget, that courage does not come wrapped in money or sealed inside mansions, or written in the contracts of billionaires. Courage comes from a choice to face danger without surrender, a choice to rise when fear demands you kneel. That night, Naomi was more than a maid. She was proof that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. She was proof that the strength to protect, to fight back, to endure, can live in the most unexpected places. But what about you? What do you think of Naomi Carter's decision? Was she brave or reckless? Would you have stepped forward, staring down the barrel of a gun to protect children who weren't even your own? Or would you have stayed silent, waiting for someone else to act? These are not easy questions, but they are the kind that linger long after the headlines fade. And perhaps that is what makes Naomi's story so unforgettable. It forces us to confront ourselves, to ask, what would I have done if it had been me in that room? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. We truly love hearing from you, and your voice is part of what makes this community powerful. And if Naomi Carter's story left you stunned, wait until you hear the next one. We are working on a story that will test your idea of loyalty, betrayal, and the choices people make when everything is on the line. You don't want to miss it. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next.